towers were already moving, massive, wooden, relentless. Their wheels crushed the dry earth as thousands of soldiers pushed from behind, straining, shouting, slipping in the dust. Arrows rained down from the walls above, striking shields, piercing armor, embedding into wood. But the towers did not stop. Inside one of them, a commander stood in silence, watching the walls of Jerusalem grow closer with every grinding turn of the wheels. He knew something the defenders did not, and within hours it would decide the fate of the city. But this was not the first time Jerusalem had faced towers like these, and not the last, because 3 times in history, 3 different commanders made 3 different decisions, and each one changed everything. The First Army arrived under a burning sun. Thousands of soldiers stretched across the hills surrounding Jerusalem, their banners snapping in the wind. The city stood high and defiant, its stone walls thick, ancient, and tested by centuries of war. Inside, defenders prepared for the inevitable. They had seen sieges before. They knew the rhythm, the waiting, the starvation, the slow collapse. But this time was different, because the man leading the army outside did not intend to wait. Titus had studied the city carefully. He walked the perimeter himself, observing every tower, every gate, every weak angle in the defenses. His officers expected a prolonged siege, cut off supplies, weaken morale, let time do the work. But Titus rejected that approach. Time was a risk. The longer his army stayed, the greater the chance of disease, rebellion, or reinforcements arriving. He needed speed. He needed shock, and he needed something the defenders could not easily counter. So he made his decision: build the towers. Roman engineers moved with terrifying efficiency. Trees were cut, stripped, shaped. Massive beams were assembled into towering structures, rising higher and higher until they matched the height of Jerusalem's walls, and in some places, surpassed them. These were not simple machines. They were mobile fortresses, layered with protective materials, reinforced against fire, designed to carry archers, artillery, and assault troops directly to the enemy walls. From above, the defenders watched in growing unease. They had expected starvation tactics. Not this, not speed, not towers that could reach them. And that uncertainty began to spread. Because if the Romans reached the walls quickly, everything would collapse faster than anyone inside the city was prepared for. But Jerusalem did not fall easily. As the towers approached, defenders adapted. Fire arrows ignited the outer layers. Stones crashed into the advancing machines. Boiling substances were hurled downward. For a moment, it looked like the towers might fail. Flames climbed their sides. Smoke filled the air. Roman soldiers hesitated. And in that moment, everything hung in balance. If the towers burned, the siege would stall. But Titus had anticipated this. He had reinforced the towers with materials designed to resist fire. Wet hides, packed earth, layered protection. The flames slowed, then died, and the towers kept moving. Inside the city, something shifted. Hope began to crack, because now the walls were no longer a barrier. They were a target. The towers reached the walls. Bridges dropped. Roman soldiers surged forward. Close combat erupted in a storm of steel and screams. And for the first time, the defenders were fighting at their own height. No advantage, no safety, just chaos. But even now, Jerusalem could have held. The defenders were still numerous. The terrain still favored them. So why did it collapse? Because Titus made a second decision. One far more brutal than the first. He ordered the city to burn. Flames spread through the streets. Panic replaced coordination. Defenders abandoned positions to protect their homes, their families, their sacred places. And in that chaos, the Roman assault intensified. What had been a defensive war became a desperate struggle for survival. And desperation breaks structure. It breaks discipline. It breaks cities. Jerusalem fell, but not because its walls failed, because its defenders were forced into a choice they could not win. Defend the city, or save what was inside it. And in trying to do both, they lost everything. But decades later, another army would face the same walls and make a very different decision. The land had changed. Empires had shifted, but Jerusalem still stood, still fortified, still symbolic, and now it faced a new threat. Saladin approached the city not just as a commander, but as a strategist who understood psychology better than most. He did not rush, he did not overwhelm, he observed. Because unlike Titus, Saladin was not fighting to destroy Jerusalem. He was fighting to take it intact, and that changed everything. His engineers began constructing siege towers, but something was different. They were fewer, more deliberate, positioned carefully rather than aggressively. From the walls, the defenders watched, confused, because this was not an all-out assault. This was controlled pressure, and pressure, when applied correctly, creates fear without chaos. The towers advanced slowly, almost calmly. Archers inside them fired with precision, targeting specific defenders, forcing movement, disrupting coordination. But the main assault did not come. Not yet. Days passed. Tension grew. Inside the city, the defenders began to ask a dangerous question. Why isn't he attacking? And that question did exactly what Saladin intended. It weakened certainty. It replaced confidence with doubt. Because when an enemy delays, it means they are waiting for something. And not knowing what that something is can be more terrifying than the attack itself. Finally, the towers reached the walls. And still, no overwhelming assault, no flood of soldiers, just controlled engagement, measured pressure. And then Saladin made his decision, not to destroy, but to negotiate. From the walls, the defenders could see the towers, close enough to strike, close enough to end the siege violently. But they could also see something else, restraint. And that changed their calculations, because now the choice was different. Fight and risk total destruction, or surrender and survive. And this time, the city chose survival. Jerusalem fell again, but not through chaos, through psychology, through controlled pressure, through a commander who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not force, but restraint. But the third time, there would be no restraint. The ground shook beneath thousands of marching feet. The air filled with the sound of drums, horns, and shouted commands. This was not a calculated siege. This was momentum. Nebuchadnezzar II had come to break the city completely. Not capture it, not negotiate, end it. And from the moment his army arrived, it was clear this would be different. The siege towers rose again, but these were heavier, cruder, built for impact, not precision. Massive wooden frames reinforced with raw force, designed to batter, to crush, to overwhelm. There was no subtlety, no psychological dance, just power, relentless, overwhelming power. The defenders fought back with everything they had. Arrows darkened the sky. Stones shattered against the advancing machines. Fire consumed parts of the towers. But the Babylonians did not slow, because Nebuchadnezzar understood something simple. If you apply enough force, eventually something breaks. And in this case, it was everything. The towers reached the walls. Battering rams followed. Impact after impact after impact. Stone cracked. Structures weakened. And then, a breach. Once the wall opened, the outcome was inevitable. Soldiers poured through. The city's defenses collapsed inward. There was no second line, no recovery, only destruction. And this time, there was no choice, no negotiation, no psychological maneuver, only consequence. Jerusalem was destroyed, its structures burned, its people scattered, its identity shattered, because the commander leading the attack had chosen total annihilation over control. 3 sieges, 3 commanders, 3 decisions, and 3 completely different outcomes. Titus chose speed and shock. He forced the defenders into chaos, and chaos destroyed the city from within. Saladin chose patience and pressure. He created fear without destruction, and fear led to surrender. Nebuchadnezzar chose overwhelming force. He removed all options, and when there are no options, there is only collapse. But the walls of Jerusalem were never just stone. They were a test of leadership under pressure, a test of decision-making when every choice carries risk. Because in the end, the towers themselves were not what decided the fate of the city. It was the minds behind them, the willingness to act quickly, or to wait, to destroy, or to control, to force a decision, or to shape one. And that is what history remembers. Not the wood, not the wheels, not the height of the towers, but the moment a commander looked at the walls and chose what kind of victory they wanted. Because every siege ends the same way. The walls fall, the city changes, and power moves on. But the decision behind that moment echoes far longer than the battle itself. If this story made you see history differently, share it with a friend who loves powerful ideas. Tap like if you enjoy content about strategy and real leadership. And subscribe to Mind of Rulers, where we break down how empires rose, how leaders thought, and why some decisions changed the world forever. History isn't just about the past, it's about how power works.